Hey everybody, it's the 5th episode of a UIO podcast special releases for coping during the coronavirus crisis. Hugs to everyone, even if they are virtual, and thank you for joining UIO, the podcast for teen girls. It is for you and about you inside out. I am Sonja Lewis, your host. Today we're talking about how to influence change, how to make it happen, not only during the best of times, but in the worst of times too. Though influencing change, learning to use your skills and abilities to do so can be one of the toughest things to do as a teenager. Our guest is going to tell us how to make inroads to work towards influencing change for a better life experience for yourself and your friends and still have fun doing so. Could it have anything to do with skills and abilities and working with like-minded girls and women who can offer support to make the world a better place? We'll ask Handa, founder of Inspiring Women Changemakers, who has worked in lobbying and led successful campaigns to influence change in the life of asylum seekers, for example, and many others. She surrounds herself with women who inspire change and is going to talk to us today about how we can inspire change in areas that are important to us, even when we're in a difficult situation such as lockdown. Welcome, Ange, and thank you for joining UIO.
Thank you so much for inviting me on, Sonja.
I mean, so much has changed, Ange, since we initially set up this interview. Coronavirus was not even on the horizons, at least in the UK. But here we are in the midst of it all, and we're coping. And though there is some light in sight, we likely have a long way to go. I want to talk to you about what you're doing personally to ensure that any positive change you've created in your life isn't lost or recovered some way, somehow. So many of our listeners must be thinking about what is lost and if they will ever get that back. So much of change is about freedom, I think, and that is one thing that we've been robbed of on different levels. But I want to get some insight from you on how to look at this in a different way, how to turn it on its head. But before we talk about what we can do to recover, remind us of what Inspiring Women Changemakers is all about and why you started it.
Inspiring Women Changemakers is a movement of people who are focused on fairness and safety for women and girls. So when I talk about fairness, that means fairness in the workplace and equality of opportunity. It means fairness in the home in terms of gender roles, and it means fairness in wider society. And safety has a broader meaning, whether it's feeling safe when we're walking on the street, maybe when we're alone or at night, or safety within our own home, sometimes with a partner or a family member that causes us harm emotionally or physically. So we are open to all genders, and it's a movement that I set up following my own Change.org campaign back in 2014, and I'm sure we'll come back to this a bit later.
That's really wonderful what you have done with Inspiring Women Changemakers. And I think it's so key to really point out that safety is important for all people, regardless of gender and that sort of thing. And that's really key. And safety is really key all the time, but especially now when we're in lockdown, and safety at home, safety outside of the home, it's all very important. So it's really key. So what can girls do during this lockdown period to influence positive change in their communities, keeping themselves safe and well?
I would say just start. So we talked earlier about what they can do to ensure that any change they have already started to do isn't lost. So if you've started already in creating some kind of change movement, what I'd like to say to you as somebody who's probably 20, 25 years older than you now is that the only thing that is constant is change. So this is about an evolvement and a way of doing things maybe slightly differently. So an opportunity opportunity that maybe you didn't have your eyes open to at the start when you created change, or you've been thinking about something that you wanted to do. Don't consider it lost or stopped. Maybe it's paused, maybe it's stalled a little bit, but there is always some small step that you can do to preserve that change and to maintain it and to start to build on it.
That's really key. And I think that's really important what you said about starting. You have to start somewhere. So often we don't realize that change is the only thing that is constant. So what advice can you give about continuing to find their own voices to our teenage girls to influence positive change in general? Because there's so much going on, with the dark cloud of just feeling that our lives have just changed so radically. How can they use their voices to influence positive change?
There are two kind of key obstacles that I see when I work with change makers, and it doesn't really matter what their age. And that is imposter syndrome, feeling like they're not good enough to do that or not important enough, or that there's some element of people pleasing and not wanting to be attacked or trolled. Unfortunately, that can come part and parcel of any kind of change, even if it's positive and even if it's something like FGM, the subject I campaigned on, that you would think everybody would be alongside and think this is wrong, this must stop, or things could be better, things must change. However you look at it, there will be some people that are resistant to that change for their reason, and you cannot make them happy. There are ways that you can get your message out, and it doesn't necessarily have to be voice in the spoken word. It might be in the written form, so it might be blogs, it might be a podcast, it could be art, it could be music, it could be really any form that helps you to express your message. You can even use an alias if you like. If you're uncomfortable about using your own voice, you can actually use a secret name. And even experienced campaigners on Twitter, there's someone called the Secret Barrister. For work-related reasons, they haven't revealed their identity. Those are just some of the ways you can set up your own blog. You can maybe write for others. And in fact, one teenage girl that I did mentor took that advice and did it because she was writing about subjects that might have been regarded in a very negative light by her community, and they were quite personal to her. So she felt comfortable using an alias. And my other advice was to find a support network of people that might not be on exactly the same mission, but are there to give you some encouragement and to help you believe in yourself and that what you're doing is important.
I think that is really key. And even in the work that I do and the sort of work that you do, finding a support network is so important. And also, I really like what you said about possibly having an alias, just getting your message out.
And I'd like to add something briefly to that, if I may. It's also about finding your well-being strategies for yourself and some inner strength and other ways to comfort yourself if you do get that backlash, and not to take it too personally either. So with a lot of the campaigning work that I do, some of the fellow campaigners on FGM have received threats of personal attack. They've had death and they've had rape threats, which sounds very extreme when you think about the subject. I have not, and I truly believe that is because I've responded with something called emotional correctness, which is not where you're necessarily agreeing with the person, but you are taking a viewpoint that is not attacking or shaming them. And to me, that is what makes an effective campaigner, or even in the workplace, when you're handling any kind of difficult conversation, if you can be in that adult mode and not go too much into the emotion or anger and you really harness it to make your point, that is when you can influence change most effectively.
That's really powerful. Emotional correctness. You can do that with your friends, and you can do that with your family as well. And I can see how it can make such a difference, because sometimes when you're so emotional about it, you cannot be objective. It becomes very subjective. That's wonderful advice. So looking to the future, how can our teenage girls think about preparing themselves for new roles? We've got this cloud still hanging over our head, And how can they start to think about new roles and opportunities to become change agents, or shall we say change makers? How can they prepare for that?
So there are a few ways they can start. So one of those ways, and the way I started, was simply at first to follow other campaigners that were already established or maybe that I'd looked up to, add my voice, engage, be brave, start sharing. But bravery really comes from practice and continually doing it. When I said at the start, just start, that can often be the most tricky thing, because you wonder, where should I start? How did they get to where they are on their campaigning journey? And it is about being flexible and understanding the ripple effect. So even if something you have done was simply to share an article and maybe write a few words of commentary alongside it, you don't know who sees that. It could have such a ripple effect on other people. And that is the way social media works, actually. So I'll give you a really quick example. This morning, I wrote a post on LinkedIn about some of the issues that have been going on in the States. And it was an article about Amy Cooper, the lady that was sacked from her job, and Christian Cooper, the bird watcher, if you've seen that on the news. And I wrote a personal comment about this in solidarity with Black Americans, but also from my perspectives as a British Asian woman. And already it's had nearly 2,500 views within less than 24 hours and a lot of engagement and sharing. So that was literally just me sharing an article and writing a comment on something that I consult organisations on, but that I'm personally passionate about and have been thinking about last night.
Yes, I mean, I think that's really good because it does show bravery, but also I think that having the communication skills and the ability to craft that message or choose appropriate articles to give support, I think that's really key.
That is key. And actually, I have a blog on my website about that. And the title of it is, on the Inspiring Women Changemakers, "In a Time of Fake News, Be Credible." And so in the article, I highlight some of the credible sources, but really it's about discernment, using your own discernment to think about what might be useful or credible. So part of it is about using your common sense, but also use your intuition and think about, what do I trust here? Who do I trust? There are very few actual individuals on, let's say, Facebook whose articles I share, but I watch them for a while, I suss out their patterns, and then I decide if I am going to share their post with a comment of my own or something in agreement with them or building on a point that they have made. And it is important to do that because even again, as I said, with adults, and in fact, particularly the older generation, parent and grandparents' age, they haven't grown up with social media in the way that the audience have, or even in the way that I've used it since my 20s or so. They don't really know what fake news is. And actually, I had to show my parents, who were in the 80s, how easy it was to create a meme using Canva, which I created in 2 minutes, just to give them that powerful example of how easy it is for fake information to spread.
I think it's so important because you just have to be credible, as you said, but understanding that, going back to the earlier point where we talked about getting backlash, you want to be able to stand by what you say and what you put out there. So I think that's really important to be discerning about what you use and what you write and so forth and so on. That's a really great point.
But also, you don't have to be an expert on everything. You, in good faith, are sometimes showing these articles, which might later turn out to be wrong, but speak about it from the heart, the place where you feel in a positive way. So either you're frustrated about something and want to make change, or you're so passionate and inspired about something that you want to make change, and use that energy to convey your message in the right way. One of the other things that I see too much with female change makers, again of all ages, is they often don't respond to the apparently well-informed older man, particularly, who are making actually a point that isn't necessarily true or correct, and they're deferring to them. And that happens so much. And I've had feedback from fellow female change makers say, you're so brave to do that and to challenge. And it's not always that I'm an expert, but I also know that they're not either.
let's talk about recovering from loss. If you feel that some effort that you've worked hard on is lost, what can you do to recover?
Well, I said earlier that I would talk about my Change.org campaign. So I think that is a great example of recovering from loss. So it was based on an asylum seeker and her two daughters who were applying for asylum in the UK. The Change.org campaign got lots of recognition and attention from the press. It was picked up by The Guardian, by ITV, all the major news channels, not just in the UK, but abroad, and by politicians and other personalities, including Richard Branson towards the end. However, the family were subsequently deported. So that could have been regarded as a loss. And it was a physical loss because I lost my friend and her girls that I cared about. And it could have been regarded as me having lost the Change.org campaign. However, it wasn't a loss because although those people who were dear to me had to go, there are many people in the UK who've used it as case law example. There are grassroots organisations who've contacted me for guidance. I've been able to speak about this in prisons and in schools on other platforms about how I went about creating the campaign and what this is all about and why it was so needed. And I was able to write a report which was launched with NHS England and my local authority on the scale of FGM in Leeds. So none of that was a loss because I kept the learning, didn't beat myself up. When I felt sad or upset or that I hadn't done enough, I drew on my support network to help and encourage me. And that was what led to Inspiring Women Changemakers, which is a huge gain because it's been not just my business of 3 years, but my baby and my beautiful connections and all those other passionate people that want to get on board and just help make the world a better place. So take the learning, take the experiences. Whatever you don't need to repeat again, don't repeat them. Whatever you think you could have done better, work to improve on it. And that's all I would say.
That's really good. Lessons learned. This is some really great stuff, and you've given us a lot of information. But before we get out of here, I'd love to ask you, what hot tips can you offer our teenage girls to make positive changes around issues that they care about right now, right where they are, during this lockdown period?
While you're at home, there is so much more that you can do. When I was your age, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't Twitter. I heard about FGM from a book called Desert Flower by Waris Daree, who is now the UN ambassador on FGM. All I could do at that time was take the book and encourage my friends to read it. Now I could take documentaries, I can take articles, I can share them and they can be reshared, read, commented on, and help raise awareness in that way. So there is already in this digital age so much that you can do to influence change. And as I said earlier, don't forget about the power of the ripple effect because it is so much more powerful than you can ever imagine and even ripples on years later.
That's really good. But some other key points, just remembering the power of the ripple effects, and emotional correctness was something that you talked about earlier, and also bravery, so much more. And it's a great podcast. I can't really wait to get it out there.
Thanks so much for having me on and for a great conversation.
And I just want to thank you so much and would love to have you back to discuss this important issue more in depth when we get out of lockdown and get back in the studio. That is a wrap for UIO on influencing positive change, with lots of great advice from Handa. Thank you, girls, for listening, and thank you, God, for the opportunity to do the show. Today, I want to pray for girls to have emotional correctness and bravery. I want to pray this for all teenage girls and for the abilities to influence positive change. During this lockdown period, I prayed that all girls will keep safe and well and get the support they need to not only make positive change in their own lives, but to influence change on a wider scale. I ask these blessings in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. That's it for our special podcast during this pandemic. This is the 5th and final one. We'll be back in the studio before you know it. We certainly hope so. Meanwhile, hit me up on Twitter at Sonja Lewis, Instagram at Sonja D. Lewis, Facebook, sonjalewis.com/UIO-podcast. Tell me what you want to hear about and keep sending those questions on any of the episodes. Take care of you inside out, and remember, it is UIO.